Okay, now I've seen online a bunch of pictures of people taking big, huge logs of rattan, something like this, carving them down flat, and ending up with something that looks a little bit less like a log, but still handles like one. So I thought I'd give a little bit of instruction on how to do some basic carving for SCA. Now, the first things you're going to need is you're going to need, of course, a piece of rattan. You need some way of measuring, some way of marking it, and a straight edge. You also need some way of holding the rattan. When I first started, all I used was a C-clamp on a door frame. I'm getting a little fancier now with a shaving horse, and I'm not going to go back to a C-clamp. And then the one piece of equipment that you need that isn't subject to variable is a marking gauge. So here's my marking gauge here. We've got a part here that measures 1.25" piece of rattan, and on a round piece of rattan, like say this here, you can see it doesn't fit inside. Now, one thing that a lot of gauges don't have that you will need is this little notch right here. This notch here is a 1/2 inch deep, and it is 1 inch wide. And basically, on any round piece of rattan, it'll automatically pass. That will not be true when we're carving, so this is why we need both this gauge and this gauge here. Okay, so for our carving, I'm going to start with 1.5 inch piece of rattan here. Nice long piece. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, on here, find where I want the striking edge to be. So, and then I'm going to mark a 1/2 inch wide space right here where the striking surface is. And then on the opposite side, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Mark a 1/2 inch area for our blade to go in. And then halfway between this edge and this edge, I'm going to draw one line right down the center. As you can see, I've already done a lot of that in advance. Now, if you look at these lines, it's really hard to tell which one is which. So one little trick that a lot of us have done is on the end, we'll actually mark, here's our striking surface, here's that back edge, here's that line there, and then we'll draw a line like this to designate where we're going to be carving. So all we're going to do is we're going to leave this alone, we're going to leave this alone, and then we're going to draw a carve between this line and this line. And so let's go ahead and do that. Got to do a little bit of adjusting here. Just realized I've got some stuff sitting here in my shop that's sticking out a little bit where it shouldn't be. Okay. So you can use pretty much any tool you want to carve the rattan. I'm using a draw knife. I've got multiple ones. I've got this little toy here. And basically all we're going to do is we're going to carve between this line and this line here. Just like that. And what you want to do is you want to carve in such a way that you can still see that line. So we're going to go right up to the line, but not over it. Now, rattan has a kind of a fibrous structure, and what that structure means is that the rattan, when it comes to grain, the grain on the rattan is probably a little bit closer to celery than anything else. And it's those long fibers which allow us to carve, for the rattan to not break as it's bending. Now here's our line here. We go down to the line. And basically, we're going to do this all the way down the blade. So here's our second mark here. Now you can really use anything you want to carve the rattan. I've heard of people using a disc sander. I've heard of using an angle grinder. Both of those options, they work, but the problem you're going to run into is they're going to kick up a lot of dust. And the actual rattan grows inside sand. So there's actually little bits of sand particles in the fiber itself. And that's going to have two functions. Number one, it means it's going to be really terrible for your lungs. So if you are using a power tool rattan, make sure you're using a dust mask. Even if you've got a good dust collection system, which I don't. The second thing is that it'll tend to dull your tools. So make sure you keep them sharp. Now, what I wanted to do, and I'm actually not doing it here, is I wanted to kind of show how, notice the nice sharp tool here is cutting the rattan very nicely. What you don't want to do, let's see if maybe I can get this guy here's a little duller, so maybe I can force this to happen. So basically, no, I did too good a job sharpening my stuff. Basically, what you don't want is you don't want to rip the rattan. When you start seeing little grooves where it's actually tearing the rattan as opposed to cutting it, what that's going to do is that's going to cause you tear out more than you need to. So when you're actually testing this with your gauge, you want to make sure that it still passes this way, and we want to, if the rattan hits the back of this slot, that is going to fail. That is the second thing that a carved rattan is going to run into that you're not going to see on a round piece. A round piece will automatically pass this test. And that's it. We're just going to continue this all the way down the blade. So that should pretty much do it. Now, I haven't carved down here yet just because I'm going to leave some space for the handle. But let's check this on the gauge. So first off, now we started with an 1.5" piece of rattan, so I've got a lot of room here. I could very easily carve this down a little bit so that it's not quite as wide. But you get the basic idea. And then more importantly, let's make sure that this still passes all the way down here. You can see I've got a little bit of a narrower spot there. Rattan does not grow straight, so you're going to end up with little bitty variations. Not too much you can do about that, and it's one of those kind of things that nobody's really going to notice once they look at a finished sword. So we're good to go there. So next thing we're going to work on is the handle. I left myself enough room for a nice handle. Now, one of the things you're going to be careful of is right here. On a cross guard, try to pick on a cross guard, try to pick a cross guard that's got a nice wide space this way. Because, I mean, this is where the force is going to be going down the weapon. It's probably my biggest complaint with some of the cross guards that I see out in the SCA right now is they'll have a small hole. And the reason is the hole generally mimics a steel sword. And just steel doesn't break, particularly right here. Steel does not break like rattan does. So what we're going to do, we're going to mark where we want this to go. So right here on the end, we're going to find our striking surface. And line that up a little bit and grab a pencil. So mark there. And you see I'm just kind of eyeballing it. I actually went a little too high there, so let's go down a touch. It's a good idea when you get a pencil, a nice sharp one. Also get one with an eraser, because it's a whole lot easier to take a look at something, erase off that mark that doesn't matter, and make sure it looks good that way before you start carving. Okay, So I'm going to set my length. Normally I'd be doing this on a table, but I just don't. Yeah, 12 inch would be a nice longsword length. So let's mark you right about there. Just work our way around. Line that up in the end. Now, when I started this, you saw that I actually marked it in advance because honestly, this is slow. Not very interesting to see. And so right here is where we're going to put that line. Make sure that's pretty straight all the way around. So right here is where our crossguard is going to be. And we're going to cut right here. And take this off. Now you can cheat this with a little bit. Use a saw here to get a nice sharp line. The problem you're going to run into is remember how this is made out of fibers. So the reason I want the biggest crossguard hole possible is so that I've got as many intact fibers adding to the strength of the weapon as possible. And one easy way to cheat yourself is to cut too deep right here. So I could very easily take a saw. As a matter of fact, I might grab one and just put a little notch here. But I want to make sure that if I do cut that way, whether I'm using a saw, chisel, or whatever, I want to make sure that I'm not cutting too deep so that I have a notch left over after I'm done removing the material so that it fits on the... so basically, right here is where I'm going to go my slowest. And I'm going to take not take off too much material, not cut too deep, because right here is usually the stress point for these carved rattan swords. And that stress point is partially determined by the size of the crossguard hole and is partially determined by the things that people do trying to fit that. So I'm going to say go nice and slow here and take my time, and then we'll get this done. In reality, I can do all of this that I'm doing right here with just the draw knife, but if you've got tools, there's no reason not to use them. So I'm going to use a little bit. Now, what I don't want to do here is I don't want to push too hard where I'm actually, sliding. So again, I'm trying to go nice and slow. And this is actually one of the biggest lessons for me when I'm working in here. After working on that entire blade, I'm down to the last little bit, I'm almost done, and I want to hurry. And that is really where it comes back to bite you. Because one little slip like this, it's not going to ruin the blade, but you've got this nice pretty edge here and suddenly you take it off. For myself, it's not something that I worry about too much. Obviously, if this was something I wanted to sell, I'd make a point of making it as pretty as possible. So, I'm going to stop here for a little bit. Now, I happen to know that crossguard of mine is right at 1.5 inches wide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my center line, and notice this is back just a touch here. So I'm actually going to put the handle back a touch as well. So right here, 1.5 inches would be here. Yeah, we'll go like that and that. So there's what I'm going to take off. Take that all the way down the blade to about here. And again, I'm going to start with the center line, and I'm going to carve out from that center line. So to here and to here. Okay, now down here I've got a profile of where I'm trying to match. So I'm just going to carve this down so that it matches this little mark that I've got here on the end. Then I'm going to work my way up. Now, one of the reasons I like a draw knife is that they're very, very easy to get. You can oftentimes find a really nice example online for 10 or 20 bucks. This one here was a gift from a sword maker. Little 5-minute bit of her time. Well, probably more than 5 minutes, but still. We're basically going to carve that down, get that to match, just follow that profile all the way up. Over the years, I've accumulated a few more tools than just a draw knife and a C-clamp. But a lot of people don't know that I was actually carving swords for sale when those were the only tools I had. A draw knife and a C-clamp to hold it, and a plain old yardstick. I've got fancier, I've got T-squares and big 6-foot long yardsticks for grit swords and a few things like that, but those are things you really don't need. To get started, as I said at the very beginning, piece of rattan, something to mark it with, something to hold it with, something to carve it with, and that is it. If you do have the tools, it's handy. You know, people say, well, why don't you just take a table saw and a jig? And the problem is you can't really easily make something like this with a jig. It's usually just a waste of time, especially for just one sword. A whole lot easier to get your hands in and take it off just. So that's probably the biggest problem with power tools in general, is taking off more material than you want. So this little bit here, take that off. Let's flip that around. Take off just. Oh. And by the way, when I was talking earlier about ripping the rattan, I said the biggest problem with ripping the rattan is taking off more material than you want. So you see, I just ripped it right there. That's a practice thing. You can. So I'm intentionally cutting up to a cut line here, so it's going to be less of an issue. It's not going to rip farther than I want, just because I've got a little mark right here in advance. So that's all the further I'm going. And obviously, I've got a little bit more leeway on the handle than I do on the blade. If I rip off too much of a blade and it fails inspection, I can fix it with some tape, put more tape on there, but if I go into all this trouble of taking off material to make the sword more nimble, lighter, why would I want to be counterproductive by having to put on a big pile of tape? The rattan, if I look at thickness, rattan is going to be lighter than tape. So yes, if you make a mistake, you can tape it up to the proper thickness so that it works. And I do recommend doing that if that's all you got. But if you got, why invite trouble in the first place? Let's do it right the first time. Spend the extra time that you need to get things exactly the way we want. And not too much, not too deep. And not make those kind of little mistakes in the first place. Okay. One other piece of equipment that you may find really handy, a plain old piece of 80 grit sandpaper. So something like this here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to put it on a block. Now, when I started, I actually used just a block of wood. I actually bought a proper sanding block. What I'm going to do is smooth things out so they look nice and pretty, nice and flat. I'm going to make a video here in a bit with some advanced stuff, but in general, you get the idea. Now, this is a way, there's a lot of people in the SCA make swords just like this. They actually maybe even steam it to give it a little bit of a curve. But you get the basic idea here. Nice long sword, nice and light. What I intended to do, but I forgot, was I was actually going to weigh this and see how much it weighed. And with the idea of weighing it after it was carved to see how much lighter it was. Because we're removing materials here, that's going to make this a lighter weapon. Now, people have asked me how these fight, and it kind of reminds me of a Stradivarius violin. I've actually heard rumors that a Stradivarius is harder to play. And this is not necessarily harder to use than any other rattan sword. But one thing you do get out of a sword shaped like this is your edge alignment. So when I'm using a round piece of rattan like this guy here, when I throw a shot, if my edge alignment's off a little bit, if I've got my hand curved a little too far, or maybe I flip things down the wrong way, you don't really notice, you know. Whereas this guy here, this guy requires a little bit more edge alignment. So if you throw a shot with this guy and your edge alignment's off, it's going to skip. So it actually, for people who want to be realistic, this guy here is going to force you to hit people with the edge. It's gonna make it a little harder to cheat. Now, when you do hit, this is still 1.5 inch wide piece of rattan, so this is going to hit harder. It's going to be a little bit less flexible, which is again means it's going to hit a little harder. So, you know, this is basically where I'm going here. Is if you're using a carved weapon, there's things I can do here. Like I said, I can take this down a little bit more to make it right at 1.25 inch, lighten it up as possible. I can maybe tweak this edge thickness and make it a little bit thinner, and the thinner this gets, the harder it's going to hit. And there's a point when you're making weapons where you make something that's going to hurt. And when you're making these, yes, the rules say that here's the way to do it, and yes, this is nice and legal, and maybe I can carve it down a little bit narrower and still make it legal, but I'm not here to hurt my friends, you know. So don't be the guy who makes a weapon that other people have to make rules for. You know, do it. Make something like this, still hits nice and stout. People are going to appreciate how it looks. People are going to appreciate how it handles. People are not going to say, oh, that's, well, they still might say it's illegal, just if they've never seen it before. And that's why I actually take this to events to point out that, no, it's perfectly legal, and anybody that's been around a while that's seen one of these go, yeah, no big deal. Handles just fine. So let me clean this up. And no, as a matter of fact, I'm not going to. I'm going to stop right here, and I'm going to talk about taking this concept and getting a little bit more advanced with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch gears, and I'm going to grab this guy here. This is a basic waster sold by Munitions Grade Arms. You guys have probably seen me talk about it before. And they've actually got two variations on this. They've got this guy here. Now this guy here is made on a table saw. The edges are nice and straight. It's got a jigsaw. Everything's nice and straight. It's probably cut with a router to give it that round edge. So very, very safe weapon. Perfectly reasonable as is. And you can actually see here, remember that rip I was talking about? Somebody ripped this guy here when they were making it. Again, it didn't hurt a thing. Just ripped the rattan a little bit. when they were making it. It does not weaken the rattan in any way. And as I can see here, when this was made, they were also nice and careful. Didn't put any notches in here that don't need to be here. So good job there. I also see some rasp marks. So this was actually carved down at this end with a rasp. Anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take what we did there, and I'm going to copy that exact same concept. I'm going to stop myself here with a little note from the future. When I made this sword, this is the first time I'd ever taken something pre-made to try to make something carved. Normally, my practice has been to start with a blank log of rattan and carve it totally from scratch. So one small mistake I made is when I made this striking surface, I made it a 1/2 inch wide. I ran into a little problem down here at the end. The problem would not have happened if I had made that striking surface 5/8 of an inch wide. So just a little note from the future. I'm going to go ahead and go with the rest of the video here, show the mistake, show how I fixed it. But just a little note, if you are following instructions here, watch it all the way to the end so you can see exactly what happened. And as I said, to prevent this problem, start with 5/8 of an inch instead of 1/2. So we've got our striking surface. So let's see, this guy here, right at 1.25 inches, so no big deal. There's our center. And we're going to go 1/2 inch over. So there to there. Do the same thing at the other end. Find our center. This guy, so there's our center. And get our 1/2 inch right here. And 1/2 inch right here. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. And then here on the flat of the weapon, I'm going to do that exact same thing. Going to give us a line right up the edge of the blade. Make it easy for me. There's marks here where it was marked when the handle was made. So, yep, that is the center line. So I'm going to just expand on this line right here. And obviously I don't need those marks. Take those off. So we've got our straight edge. So now normally I'd be doing this on a table. Only reason I'm doing it on my shaving bench is because I'm lazy. We're lazy enough that I don't want to move the camera around. So get a nice straight line. Oops, moved on me. There we go, nice and easy to see. And then let's do our edge. I said it's worth it to go nice and slow here. Just that's the two areas that I'd recommend going slow. Go slow right here when you're carving, and go slow when you're marking, so that you don't end up with lines like I just did, where one end's moving on you while you're marking things. There we go. Nice line there. Hopefully you can still see this even though I just bumped the camera. Not used to working with a camera in the shop. I'm used to dogs, I'm used to cats, I'm used to kids. Not used to a camera looking over my shoulder. The dog's learned when I say look out, he'll pull his head back, even if he's trying to lay his head on my knee while I'm marking. Yeah, I can see it. Okay. So yeah, a little bit of craziness right there. Let me clean that up. There we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to do just like that first piece here. and I'm going to carve from this line to this line in a nice straight line. The problem you're going to run into is on this guy here, the angle is going to be kind of like that. And then as we go this way, the angle is actually going to turn. So it's actually not a straight line. If I was actually to cut this angle here in a straight line back, you'd actually end up with a V down here in the flat wood. And that's going to take off some material, but this is one of those cases where I actually think hand carving is going to be advantageous over doing something on a round table or a jigsaw. Jigsaw. Router table or table saw. So let's grab our trusty draw knife. Before I do this, I was going to weigh it. I remember I said I wanted to weigh the last one. I didn't. So before I get ahead of myself, let me actually see how much this thing weighs, so I can see how much material I'm actually removing here. Well, that was a bust. The old postage scale that I used to use when I was selling swords is electric, and the batteries are dead. So, and of course, the batteries that I used were watch batteries, and I don't have any spares, so I'm not going to do that. Now, you notice when I was carving here just a second ago, I started to rip the wood, and you can see the characteristic grooves there, and you notice I just stopped. If I just kept pulling, I can cut the wood down here, but I might gouge it deeper than I want to. So what I'm doing is I'm actually going to take, there we go, and I'm going to very carefully remove that so that I'm not taking off more than I need to. I want a nice flat surface here, as you can see. Can't even tell that I ripped it at all, with just a little bit of carving. Now, remember how I said you need to keep these tools nice and sharp? Well, there's why. Barely finished one sword, and it's already starting to get a little bit dull. So, one little thing you can do from a production point of view is if it starts to get a little bit, oops, get a good grip there. Come on, there we go. I'm going to put it 2 feet. There's what I want. Yeah. Normally I wouldn't be fighting with it this much, but I do want to do things so everybody can see them. That's why I've been, among other things, trying to hold my carving bench here with just one leg. And get everything out of the way. One little thing that I did when I made this sawhorse here, as you can see, I put a little groove in it, just enough so that when I'm holding it, not quite oriented perfectly, I can still hold it nice and good. And I'm just going to do, basically repeat exactly what we did with the other piece. So this end here is going to look almost identical to the other one. But as we get here, you said that angle, you can probably see that if you look really close. We got this angle here, and then as we go this way, it flattens out a little bit more. So I'm going to continue that, so bear with me here. And let's do a little bit of carving. Okay, so I think that's pretty much going to do it. Got our piece all the way down like this. Now here's the acid test. As you can see, looking here on the end, this is pretty much exactly the same shape as we had off of that other piece that I did out of that 1.5-inch piece of rattan. Obviously, I'm starting with something a little bit thinner, and I mentioned on this guy here, you can carve this down a little bit farther to get But the main thing you want to do is you want to be careful about taking on too much. Now, this is actually the first time that I've taken a sword like this and something pre-made and tried to carve it down. So let's see how well that worked. So first test. Yep. Fine. Said the inch and a quarter, all the way good. I kind of expected that because this line here is really unchanged from what we had before. And then here, nice and safe, no problems whatsoever. And then as we get, there we go. This is right, yeah, so here we're good. Just barely, right here. So right as we point, this little bit right here is actually fails. Okay, so this is, see if I can show you what I'm talking about here. So this, even though this passes this piece here, this fails this test here. So this is actually needs a little bit more width here. Now when I carved swords myself, I never started with a piece that was nice and flat like this. On the swords that I hand carved, they're actually thicker up here and have a distal taper, so they actually go down in thickness as they go along the length. What we can do here, and unfortunately this is going to hurt the lines a little bit, but let's make this legal by taking off a little material. So now so if I was to do this again, what I would probably do is instead of marking a 1/2 inch wide striking surface, I might go with something a little wider. So basically I'm trying to fix things. Now obviously this is not something I would do for a sword that I was selling. This would be for personal use. Yeah, so there we go. Now we're legal. Okay, so not quite as pretty and wide as it was before, a little bit narrower, but now it passes all the way down. And yep, got the exact same problem here, starting right, just this last little bit right here. So just gonna make this just a touch wider. And as I said, I could have avoided this problem by using a wider strip here in the first place, or by starting with a distal taper on my rattan. There we go. So yeah, now we're legal. Okay. So just a little bit of adjustment. Weight-wise, as you can see here, I started with a 2-inch wide piece of rattan. Still hitting my camera again. So well, maybe I started with a little bit thicker than 2, because this is right at 2 inches here. But as you see, this looks nothing like those big flat planks, that I see. And weight-wise, this is, most of the weight's back here, so balanced in the hand. This is probably lighter than 1.25 inches. I mean, in the way that it handles. I mean, on a scale, it's probably a little heavier, but not. I don't care about what it weighs in the scale, really. I care about how it handles in the hand. So put a crossguard on here, leave a little bit of width for the gauntlets, and then the pommel, and we're good to go. So that is basically how you carve a rattan sword, both starting. So the first example, as I said, I started with 1.5 inch piece of rattan, took the skin, took it off down to here, and I said, for personal use, I'll probably carve this down a little bit farther, get a little bit closer to this width. Take some of that weight off of this long sword here. What I'll probably also do is maybe mark round this off a little bit so I don't have this edge going all the way up to the point. But there's my long sword. Well, leave room for the pommel, leave room for the crossguard. So still a good, decent long sword. A little longer than I prefer, so I may whack it down a little bit there as well. So these are just for personal use. when I get back out on the field again. And then this one here, as you can see, although it's a 2-inch piece of rattan, it is by no stretch of the imagination one of those big logs. This is the way that I was taught. These are the swords that we had. My personal blades that I carved are actually wider than this. I intentionally went down to the minimum half-inch width, especially the long swords. On the long swords, most of those have a 3/4 inch striking surface. Again, because I don't want to be the guy that they have to make rules for. So that's basically it. I'm going to make another, and you can see here, right here, this little flat spot, that's where that rattan twisted while I was carving in, when it twisted in my shaving bench. Shaving horse. Ugh. Missing words today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my sanding block, which I misplaced. Sand this up so that it's, see, I feel a little bump here on my finger. So I'm going to take a sanding block, sand that perfectly smooth. Use a block so that it's perfectly smooth instead of, the rounding that my fingers give it. And that's it. We've got a very light, very quick sword, and that's the basics of how I was taught to carve a sword. Thank you.